Okay. So this is using Sequelize. Don't worry about this. This is the part that I want you guys to think about. So the port will be handled in. The port will be handled by Heroku in this way, and this is for your local machine. So going back to our application, we're only worrying about local right now. OBS. Oh yeah, yeah. I'll install that at some point. All right. So now we've actually done this all in class. So you guys, I mean, we've done all this in class, so this should be reviewed. But I want to take this step by step. So next, again, we're setting up our server. So our next step is actually just this part over here. So we have our app.listen. So let me just make sure I didn't miss anything. These are just routes, and more routes. Cool. So at this point, we do app.listen. It takes in this variable port, which is set to 3000. Then it has a callback function and says, as soon as it's listening, then it says, oh, app is listening on this port. So once we have all this information, it should work. So if I run nodemon server.js and I go to 3000, it says cannot even, right? So it cannot get. So the server is running. So we are successful there. It's just that we don't have no routing set up. So anything that goes to 3000, it's not receiving any information. But at least we have something set up where the server is actually able to at least give bad stuff back. Oh, yes, Nodemon is being used globally. It's pretty great, actually. Here, let me go to Nodemon, and it's a node package. Okay. Yeah, it's just a global installation, and if you just use the -g argument passed to the command, then it installs it globally, and you can use it wherever you want. So it's pretty cool, because all it really does is stops your server and reloads it every time you make a change to a file. So if I just put like B, and let's see if I can. I saved it, and now look, it crashed because it started, it saved it again, it had no idea what B was. Saved it, started again, and now it's fine. So basically, it's magic. Next part, what we're going to do is we're going to start off with routing. Because we're getting this 3000, we start our server, but we have no idea how to route. So in order to start routing, what we're going to do is we're going to route to our most basic aspect. So our most basic aspect is our root. So we're going to have this part over here. So we have this routes, and I have this double indent, or sorry, double commented out. I don't need that. Same with this. So this is a basic route that sends the first user to the Ajax page. So what we have is this app.get at this root path. So this root path is over here. So remember the different parts of the URL. We have our scheme or a protocol. From there we have our subdomain over here. This has a subdomain. We have our domain over here, and we have our port number. Again, locally, we usually have to determine our port numbers. What is the default port numbers for HTTP and HTTPS? Anyone remember that? Yeah. Yes, 80. Andy wants to go hardcore, so he's going to go to like 8 billion. 8 billion it is. So those are just default ports, and most are set that way anyway, so you don't really have to worry about these. But if you did need to manually set it, know that there is the option of doing that. Cool. So now we know that we are routing to our root path. And remember, path starts with this // after the domain name, right? So normally on a production machine, this would be after like, you know, poopfantasies.com, fantasies.com / and then this would be the path that it starts off with, whatever the domain name was, like if it was, you know, Amazon.com or something like that, then it would be like, you know, the path would be whatever you put after it, like GP CSS returns homepage.html. That's a path right there as well. I'm definitely not Googling it, but you guys can go ahead. So instead, I'm using my local machine. So I'm going to localhost 3000, and again, the default path is going to be set. But now I get a reference error. It says path is not defined. And notice that over here, instead of me just sending back some JSON like this, so this is a very basic way of me sending some JSON back, right? It's like, or not JSON, but some information. For instance, I could just say, hey, this is working. And I refresh this, I get this back. So we know that our routing is working, but when I did this over here, notice that it gave me an error, and that's because we use this path. Path is actually built into Node, but it's not required, right? So we have to require it. So this is actually pretty simple. I think the only confusing part is this dir name and path.join. So res.send file, instead of just sending back a string or buffer of data, what it does is it combines the current directory path you're at along with the file path and just concatenates them and then just sends that back. So you can use this wherever you want. So if you were to put this in another file, whatever, you can always send back this directory name with view.html or whatever you want to pass it, and it would automatically prepend the path, making an absolute URL to send back. So now when I do res.send file, it sends the correct file back, and it looks for this file, and it's like, oh, okay, well, it's right here. So if I do res.send file, it's gonna give me an error because we don't have path. Now, what does your Ajax page do versus the routes here? So we're going to go over that right after this. So that's a good question. It's like, what is the Ajax doing? I mean, if it's asking for this information, then why are we sending this back? So first thing we want to do is we're calling a GET request, right? So the GET request from our client side is making a call to this path, and this is automatically the same as if we didn't pass anything at all. And what that does is hits this route over here. So app.get. Excuse me. So we're sending this view.html back, but again, we need to include path first. So what we're going to do is we just require that, and if I refresh it again, now it works, right? And we don't magically have this application or this file created automatically, right? This is a file that's pre-made. But this one I'm not going to go over too much because you guys should definitely know HTML and Bootstrap by now. If anyone does not understand HTML and Bootstrap, I highly recommend going back to the basics. I highly recommend Team Treehouse. I highly recommend going to your in-class exercises from week 1 and 2 and really reviewing those and reviewing the homeworks as well. All right, so next, at the bottom of our application, of our Bootstrap, I can be a little bit more forgiving because Ajax is a little bit harder to remember. So we have this functionality. So we have some scripts built into the page, and again, this isn't best practice. Normally, we're actually going to be using external JavaScript that's linked when it comes to applications not using React or front-end framework. So in this case, we have an event listener. So the event listener is waiting for someone to click on this search button. So if we go and click on here and inspect, then you'll see that we have this search button ID. So this corresponds with our ID that's set over here. Now, once someone has clicked on it, what executes is we store the information that's inside of that character search field. So it's an input field. And if we went back here and we look, character search corresponds to when I highlight it, when I hover over it, then it's getting the information from here. So this is very basic stuff that you guys might have forgotten, but hopefully not. Because the basics of input-output in all pretty sense. So input-output is really important. So this is inputting, and we're getting the information from the input and storing it in a variable. So we have this information now when we clicked on the button. And then what we did was we cleaned up the data. And cleaning up the data is just as important as validating it. Notice that we didn't really validate the data. Data validation is a little bit different than cleaning up the data. So validating the data would mean making sure that it's following a certain convention, that it doesn't have all these things inside. And then you can consider it part of the same thing, but just for semantics, I consider it a little bit different. Where you validate the data. If it's not right, then what you do is you clean it up afterwards. And if the information is nefarious, meaning that they're trying to perform like a SQL injection or something like that, then you say, okay, no, we're not going to take that data and possibly report them to the FBI. So once we have the information, what this does is it takes this information that was placed inside of the input, and then you're going to do a regex function that's going to replace all the spaces with no spaces, and then it's going to convert everything to lowercase. Now, when that happens, can anyone explain what lines 64 to 76 do? And you guys can take some time to analyze this. In the meantime, I'm going to get myself a drink. Let's see, I'm reading through the comments. Okay. So who can explain to me what line 64 through 78 do? Don't everyone talk at once. Everyone, come on. Stop shouting. One at a time. Oh, do you guys not see my screen? Wait, have you guys not been seeing my screen this whole time? No, okay. Oh, Andy, thanks for volunteering. So let's just explain it. Thank you. Gentlemen. Andy. Does an AJAX call based on the data the user inputs in? Correct. So that's where this is happening. And then what about this part? And Andy, you can turn on your mic too. And the data is being checked on API search character. See, there it's not. Okay. Yes. So if there's data, so this is checking for false values. If there's a false value in here, so if it's undefined, null, 0, or false, then it's going to hit this else statement. Correct. But if it's true or truthy, it's going to go to this. Ah, fine. Okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm. 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 So there's no scope in this one though, right? The scope only exists within, um, let's see, yeah, block scope only exists when using let. So we go into the block statement. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You remember what the text method does in jQuery? Does anyone remember? Does the script have to be inside of the HTML files? So it writes to the HTML, correct? But and there's two methods for doing that. There's HTML and there's text. So text just allows you to put in strings and information. So Lynn was asking, does the script have to be inside of the HTML files, or can you href this from another file? It's a good question. You should be able to href this from another file instead, but instead what we're doing here is we're just doing it in one file because we haven't looked at how to use static assets yet. So Express actually has this static server that allows you to automatically receive static files and link to them automatically, but we haven't started using that yet. I think we're going to start using it this coming week, yeah, this coming week. So everything should be fine at that point. Manually sending back each and every file, which is it's going to be app.use, and then we're going to use the I think it's the only middleware that's built into Express is the static applications or the static module. So if you guys want to take a look at the static middleware that's built into Express, that allows you to do what most static applications do. You guys have already been working with static servers up to this point. Can you guys think of a static server you guys been using? GitHub Pages, yes, GitHub Pages. That is a static delivery service. So what it does is it sets up the server for you and the hosting. And what it does is whatever requests you make, it just gives you all that information back. So it essentially maps all the information that you have into a routing set. And this is all set as static. And we're going to do something similar with our own set of views. So anything that's going to be, like client-side JavaScript, Bootstrap, CSS, HTML, a lot of these are going to be set in our own little static area. And generally it's called views. And, generally it's called like public or views, depends on how you want to do it. But what's going to happen is anything in that directory, as soon as you ask for that resource, it will already exist instead of you having to request it, right? So it is available for other information, and if you do make a request for it, you don't need to have any processing on the server side for you to have that information on the client side. So to see the difference between these two different types of static versus dynamic applications, you actually have Express, which is a dynamic application that serves static assets. And these static assets are essentially like any assets that are returned back on request without any processing happening in between. So notice that instead of doing this, we actually didn't really do any processing here, right? So this is like this could definitely be set as a static application. But let's say we wanted to do some stuff to request and response and then return response. So that makes it a dynamic request, right? So we could be contacting our MySQL database or a MongoDB or Elasticsearch or whatever you guys want to do. Then process that information, so based on our logic, and then return a response if we wanted to return a response. All right. So discuss that with each other. I'm going to grab my drink. So I will kill you guys. The origins of life. Charles Darwin. All right. So let's move on then. All right. So does anyone not understand how this works over here? Just on the client side. We're not worrying about server side yet. Mm-hmm. Exactly. So this is a AJAX request that essentially listens and waits for the information to come back, and this callback function has a worker attached to it in the background that basically is like, hey, is there information come back? Is there information come back? Oh, information came back. Cool. So now, when the information come back, no matter what it was, so instance, let me search for Nicholas, and unless you're a Jedi, I should be getting back. Are you a Jedi? Oh! Why am I not getting information back? Can you guys tell me? Very, very specific, yes. I commented out stuff, yes. So this isn't working, even though the call is being made, I'm not getting any data back, but I should still be getting the force is strong with this one, right? But this data never comes back, so I'm not ever able to execute this function because it never gets any data returned back to it. So let's fix that. Why don't we go to here? So I'm going to comment out some of it. So let me comment out the rest of it. So this file over here is making a which HTTP method is this? Not a trick question. Yeah, you better get. All right, so this is making a GET request, and this method over here is waiting for this GET request, right? So anything that the first thing that happens, remember, is it goes from top to bottom, but it also searches through middleware first. So remember that anything with the app.use is middleware. Then it searches for app.set and things like that, and then it'll go to the routes. So routes are app.get, post, etc. There's even an app.all, which listens for all of them. Don't worry about that. And it looks and sees, okay, well, the request being made is not at /, it's at API. Okay, so we have API. And now we have this weird colon characters thing. So why do we create this colon characters thing with a question mark? Yes, correct. So it makes it a variable that stores a value, right? So the value coming in is going to be correct. So it's going to be anything in there, right? So anything past this within this API route is going to be the information that gets passed as an argument, similar to an argument being passed in a function where the parameter is replaced by the argument. So we have this as the parameter, and then we can say the argument being replaced by the search character. Now, just like you would have the parameters inside of a function, you have the ability to then call this information as if it was a parameter. So you have the parameter, but the parameter is not stored just in the callback function. It's stored inside of the request object. And that makes sense, right? All right, is it supposed to replace the character name? Yes, it's supposed to replace this exactly. I missed, how do we know that is the route it is going to again? So it knows because the first thing it does is it searches for anything with /API. So over here it hits the /API, and then we know that any information after it is going to be over here. So this is the information after it. So anything with /API is going to be what it hits. And it is going to be replacing this. So the request object, remember the request object is generated, right? When you make a request with a GET request, and I sent out a link. Actually, you guys might benefit from this too. I don't think I sent this out to everybody yet. Me and some of the instructors, we created the curriculum resources document, and that should give you a whole bunch of different resources for learning about different aspects of programming. But I also started creating this content Q&A for learning about different aspects of each one as well, like specific questions. Like, so in this case, like, what is SSL? What are different parts of the URL? Difference between HTTP, HTTPS. And one of them was like HTTP methods and how they work. So here, actually, let me just send this out here. And so one of them is like the HTTP methods, and you can see how GET methods actually work and what gets sent instead of a GET method when the request is being made. So when you make that request, all that information along with the headers and all that stuff gets stored inside of this request object and gets packaged in this request object by Node. Now, there's an additional, can you explain what we get between request.characters? So there is no request.characters. What happens is this request object is generated every time a request comes in. and it has all these like preset properties, and these get populated with different values depending on what gets sent to it. So you have the server and it's waiting for a request. A request comes in. It's like, okay, I'm going to generate this request object. I have all these different properties and values, and the values are going to be set by what information was set from the request. So if the request sent in information about, its protocol, its domain name, what browser they're using, what operating system they're using, when the request was sent, things like that, they get stored in this request object. Another thing that can be sent is URL parameter. So the URL parameter gets stored in this property of the request object called params. And then that character gets stored as a property of that params. So you have that params object as a property, which is then a property of request. And this makes sense because then you can just think of, oh, params is an object, request is an object, params is just a property of request, and characters is a property of params. I actually tried doing a console.log rec, and it just gives me this huge thing. So watch what happens. Let me see. This should be okay. Yeah, okay. So I'm going to make a request for Nicholas. And if you look here, it's like this huge thing. So it's just really hard to go through. I mean, it's just insanely long. What I would actually do is just pipe this information to a file. Yeah, it's huge, right? It just keeps going. So, all right. I would actually just do something like,